If you were born between 1840 and 1850, you would not think of yourself as living in the Industrial Revolution. You'd just be someone trying to make a living while the ground quietly, then violently shifts under your feet. Your life would begin in a world that still feels mostly like your grandparents', and end in one your grandchildren would recognize as the start of the modern age. If you arrived in this decade, your first memories would be small and ordinary: a crowded room, the smell of smoke or damp earth, the sound of animals or street noise outside. The big words of your time, empire, nation, industry would mean nothing to you at first. What you'd notice is whether there is food, whether adults are tense, whether winter feels longer than usual. No one looking at you as a baby would see a person of railways and telegraphs. They'd see a future field hand, factory worker, servant, shopkeeper, mother, father, soldier. But by the time you are old, the distance between your childhood and your grandchildren's will be bigger. Bigger than anything your ancestors experienced. Your early years would be defined by where you're born. If it's the countryside, your universe is fields, lanes, and sky. You learn which clouds mean trouble, which insects swarm before rain, how deep the river gets after storms. You help with small tasks as soon as you can carry a bucket or scare birds from crops. You know the names of tools and animals long before you know the names of countries. If it's a town, your world is tighter and louder. You learn the rhythm of market days, recognize trades by their sounds, the ring of a hammer, the scrape of a saw, the thump of looms behind walls. You thread between carts and people, learn where you're allowed and where adults will shout. School, if it exists for you, is not about self-expression. It's about copying letters, repeating numbers, reciting prayers or patriotic lines until they stick. A mistake earns a slap or a blow. Many children around you never go at all. Others leave almost as soon as they start, needed at home or at work. Illness and death are close by. A bad cough can turn into a funeral. A cut can turn deadly. You see adults cry in ways they try to hide. You are too young to grasp statistics, but you learn deeply that staying alive is not guaranteed. As you approach your teens, you notice things that weren't there in your earliest memories. New buildings appear at the edges of town or near rivers. Long, brick structures with tall chimneys. More smoke stains the sky. You see people, often young people, walking at dawn toward those buildings, and coming back after dark, clothes and faces marked by dust or grease. You start hearing about the railway, even if you haven't seen a train. Maybe a line is being planned or built nearby. Surveyors show up with strange instruments. Laborers dig, haul, and lay track across fields that used to belong to someone you know. The sound of hammering and shouted orders becomes part of the background. The news you overhear shifts too. Adults talk not only about harvests and prices, but about protests, new laws, and big events in cities they've never visited. Crowds gathering, troops marching, rulers promising reform or cracking down. The words strike, union, charter, constitution, or abolition may begin to appear in your vocabulary, even if they're fuzzy at first. You're old enough to sense a pattern: more noise, more movement, more strangers passing through. By the time you're in your late teens or early 20s, the question is no longer whether the new economy is coming. It's what your place in it will be. If you stay on the land, you're working in a system that is being quietly reorganized by forces far away. Grain and goods move by rail and steamship. Prices in other regions can undercut what your neighbors produce. You may find rents rising, wages squeezed, or jobs disappearing as larger operations swallow smaller ones. If you go to town or city, you're pulled into the industrial rhythms that now rule so much of life. A typical day might mean waking before dawn in a single room shared with family or strangers, walking to a mill, factory, mine, or yard, working all day at one task, feeding a machine, hauling loads, hammering metal, sorting materials, with short breaks and constant supervision. Walking home in the dark, clothes and lungs full of whatever your workplace produces. Your time is no longer marked by sun and season, but by bells and whistles. The machine does not care if you're tired. If you are too slow, there is usually someone else desperate enough to take your place. Some people in your decade slip into slightly different roles. Clerks in offices, shop assistants, junior teachers, lower-ranked soldiers or policemen. These paths require literacy, luck, and someone to open a door. They still rarely lead to security, but they change how your days feel. For your parents' generation, the big city might have been a distant rumor. For your generation, it may be where you live most of your life. You get to know streets that are always busy, never completely dark or quiet. Rooms where multiple families share a floor, where walls are thin and privacy rare. Water that is unsafe unless boiled, and sewage that is everyone's problem. Crowds at markets, churches, pubs, and cheap theaters, places where you feel anonymous and packed together. You also get used to variety. You hear different accents and languages, see clothes and foods from other regions. You begin to understand that there is no single way to live, even among people with the same job. Ideas travel through these crowded spaces. Leaflets appear. Someone stands on a box and makes a speech about wages or rents or the right to vote. Another rails against drink or sin. Another urges faith and patience. Yet another calls for resistance and change. You may not join any movement, but the air you breathe is thick with argument. By your 40s and 50s, there are two technologies that quietly redefine what far away means: the railway and the telegraph. Trains have stopped being novelties. They arrive and depart to timetables. They bring in grain, coal, manufactured goods, and travelers. They carry out workers, migrants, soldiers, prisoners, and hopeful families. Even if you rarely ride one, you live with their sound and their consequences. Telegraph wires run along these same lines and main roads, carrying coded pulses that turn into words somewhere else. You may never tap a key, but you see how quickly news can travel now. A war declared, a ruler assassinated, a market panic, a peace treaty, all can be known in your city within hours. Together, rails and wires mean that decisions made in distant capitals and markets hit your life faster than ever. Prices shift, orders rise or fall, jobs appear or vanish, and no one in your neighborhood had any say in it. At the same time, the politics of your age grows louder. You see, workers organizing in unions and associations, demanding laws and recognition. Campaigns around slavery, serfdom, or other coerced labor systems, and their messy aftermath. Arguments over who should be allowed to vote or hold office, and on what terms. Early movements where women insist that their lives should count in public decisions. You have lived long enough to know promises don't always become reality. But you've also seen that constant pressure can force changes that once seemed impossible. If you live into your 70s, 80s, or beyond, you watch the 19th century give way to the 20th. You might sit by a window in a city that has doubled or tripled in size since your youth. You watch electric lights come on at dusk instead of gas lamps or candles. You hear the ring of telephones first in offices, then perhaps in some homes. You see newspapers crammed with foreign news, advertisements, and serialized stories. You may see, or at least hear clearly about early automobiles rattling over cobblestones, scaring horses, and splashing mud. You may read about or see photographs of attempts to fly. Medicine and sanitation are not miracles, but they are better. Clean water systems, sewers, and understanding of germs reduce some of the diseases that claimed friends and siblings, though the poor still die earlier than the rich. Young people talk about the future with a confidence you might find naive or admirable. They assume trains, factories, mass-produced goods, and global news are the baseline. They cannot imagine life without them in the way you cannot quite believe how much has changed. You become, for them, a living connection to a vanished world, a time before railways were everywhere. Before cities grew so large, before wires and machines tied their lives to distant places. If you were born in this decade, you almost certainly won't have your name in a history book. Your life will be recorded in church registers, official forms, maybe a family story and a single fading photograph. But across your years, you experience a shift from village tracks and small towns to dense industrial cities and railway networks. A shift from local gossip to newspapers and telegraphed news shaping your work and prices. A shift from work paced by nature to work paced by clocks, bells, and machines. A shift from silent acceptance to organized voices, unions, movements, petitions demanding change. You share a birth decade with industrialists and labor organizers, generals and deserters, inventors, and the men and women who actually run their machines. You share even more with millions of people who never shape policy or headlines, but whose daily effort keeps families fed and cities functioning. Being born between 1840 and 1850 means starting life in a world your grandparents would recognize, and ending it in one your grandchildren would call modern. Your story, even if it stays only inside your family, would be one real thread woven through that great turning of the century.